everybody. Welcome back or welcome to Sectors Made Simple. Our goal here on this channel is to provide educational resources for anybody looking to get a head start in the world of investing, finance, and to understand the world of economics a little bit better. While not everyone needs to get a degree in economics, we are all part of the economy, whether we like it or not. So today we get to talk about a current event going on here in the United States because the impacts that it has, both realistically with supply of different things here in the US, but also economically and financially, could be pretty impactful to us all. So we're going to get to talk quite a bit about the port strike currently going on October 1st of 2024. So let's take a look at what we'll cover in this webinar. And as a quick reminder, this webinar is a lot of research, a lot of preparation, and a lot of findings, but it's also going to be a little bit of my opinion. I'm going to provide my analysis and take on what's going on right now, and I do want you to remember that that is strictly my opinion. The reason that we're going to go through all of the background context and talk about the basic ideas that are powering this whole machine is because I want you to make your own decision as well. So, take what you learn here, do your own research, and come to your own conclusions. That's the hope. But with that said, here's what we'll cover in today's webinar. We're going to talk about what the ILA, or International Longshoremen Association, is. Try saying that one 5 times fast. Why they are currently on strike, which ports here in the United States are directly impacted, the importance that these ports have on the United States trade, the direct supply impacts of this strike, the indirect impacts of this strike, the direct economic and the indirect economic impacts, and then finally, we're going to compare this shipping disruption to another slightly bigger shipping disruption that occurred just 3 years ago. Sound good? Let's dive into it. Reminder, if you're new here, welcome. This is Sectors Made Simple. We are all about teaching economics and investments. That's it. We will talk about current events, but we are not a labor channel. We are not a pro-union or anti-union channel, nor are we going to review the ethics of the contracts and the reasoning that the contracts have been approved or denied. Spoiler, all of this is about contracts. Not the focus. I will tell you what the points are that have become issues with the contract, but I'm not going to say one side is right or the other side is wrong. We're not going to say if the strike is warranted, if striking is the correct move, if the administrative decision to not get involved in the strike is the right move. That's politics, that's negotiations, not the point. The point is talking about what is happening because the workers are on strike, talking about the direct impacts, but more importantly, how those different events impact you right now and in the future. Additionally, we are covering current events. This strike began on October 1st of 2024. This webinar is being recorded live on October 1st of 2024. We are working with whatever information we have right now. We don't know how long the strike will last. We don't know what changes or opinions will happen in the future. We're all working with the same basic stuff right now. But I want you to know about this because it's happening, people are talking about it, and you should know why this impacts or has the potential to impact you. So it is possible that new information comes out tomorrow, and that completely changes the whole dynamic. But we're going to try and cover all of our bases through this video. Starting off, let's talk about the ILA and their contract. The ILA, or International Longshoremen Association, is a union of over 85,000 members across the globe. Over 50,000 of them are located in ports within the eastern seaboard of the United States, being the Gulf Coast, so think Texas all the way down to Florida, and then up the East Coast from Florida all the way up to Maine. This union is responsible for helping to negotiate contracts for many different dock workers, both domestically and internationally. One of the organizations that they negotiate contracts with is known as USMX, or U.S. Marine Alliance. This company is responsible for many of the largest ports here in the United States, and there was negotiations between the ILA and USMX on their new contract. Their previous contract was expiring on October 1st, and the two organizations were tasked with negotiating with each other to agree upon what contract they'll use in the years to come. This was where all of the problems began, because a deadline was set for October 1st to agree upon the terms of this new contract. We are talking about this because no agreement was reached. There was a major divide between what ILA wanted and what USMX wanted. Again, I'm not going to comment on which one I think is right or wrong, not the point. The points that they were discussing were USMX was proposing a 50% increase in wages over the next 6 years, whereas ILA wanted that to be $5 more per year, totaling up to an amount of 77% increase over the next 6 years. Additionally, USMX wanted to begin using more automation to help manage the logistics of all of these major ports. The ILA felt that these increases in productivity and these automations are threatening jobs of their union members, and as a result, they wanted to have guarantees within the contract that union jobs would not be replaced by AI or automation. So, those were the two big sticking points, and a final proposal was given by USMX yesterday, which was declined by the ILA, and at midnight Eastern Time, the strike began. So, this strike, as I mentioned before, affects a number of different ports across the Gulf Coast and East Coast of the United States. I'm going to list a number of these ports in order of how large they are relative to the other ports here in the United States. Newark and New York is the largest port affected and is the second largest U.S. port. Then we have Savannah, Georgia, being the fourth largest port, Houston, Texas, fifth largest, Norfolk, Virginia, sixth, Charleston, South Carolina, eighth, and finally Miami, Florida, 10th. Second, fourth, fifth, sixth, eighth, and 10th. Over half of the largest ports in the United States currently have no one working them. And the thing is, these are just the big ones. There are many, many more smaller ports that are also being impacted. In total, the ports that are affected by this strike process around $3 trillion across both imports and exports. That is a crazy large number and gives us a full scale of just how much material is going through these ports every single year and over time. Now, it's obvious that these ports need people to work them. People need to unload boats, but people also need to load boats. So the reality of this strike is not that these places are empty and everything continues as normal. It means that there are massive cargo ships that are currently stuck in these ports and can't be unloaded or can't be loaded, or there are cargo ships that are trying to arrive in these ports and have nowhere to dock. So where are they supposed to go? So the boats coming into port cannot unload because there's no one there to unload them. So they're stuck. And they're not just stuck sitting there waiting. They're stuck with containers of stuff on the boats. And that stuff and those containers is where all of the issues can start to stem from. Because the reality of it is, those containers are very, very, very important. Every port in the United States handles imports, but also exports. So they will be doing both. Ships will be coming into into the United States and dropping stuff off. And as they're dropping stuff off, those same boats are being loaded up with new product, all in the form of containers. And again, not every port does the exact same thing. So it's not like, for example, if you are driving and you start to get low tire pressure in one tire. Is that something you should probably fix? Yes, but the car can still drive. What we're talking about here is you're driving a car and you just lost your steering wheel, or you just lost your brakes or your gas pedal. Not every part of the car does the same thing. Not every port does the same thing. So what we're seeing is a number of key industries become severely impacted, and some of these industries are on a timer. So let's quickly take a look at what key industries are being impacted by this strike. Overall, for the United States, 68% of containerized exports and more than 56% of containerized imports go through these ports. To quickly define some of the words I just said, containerized means they're essentially in giant bricks. You load a brick on, you take a brick off. That's how a lot of cargo is transported, and you've probably seen pictures or videos of these cargo ships with massive little Lego blocks lining the top rails. That is a big pallet of containers. So, when we're talking about exports, we're saying 68% of the big containers that are taken out of the US and dropped off somewhere else in the world are impacted. And over 50% of the containers coming into the United States are impacted as well. This broken down looks a little bit different. 76% of imported vehicles are impacted, 54% of vehicle exports, 51% of aircraft and spacecraft components, 77% of spacecraft and aircraft components, but also there's a few additional, more troublesome industries as well. Because one thing you don't need to worry about is keeping your car, or the car container, refrigerated. It's not going to spoil it. It's a car. So delays with getting your car just means you wait a little bit longer for your car. But not all of these containers are cars. Many of these containers contain perishable products, things that have a timer, or as we think about it, an expiration date. This includes 91% of imported pharmaceutical products. This is medications, many of which are life-saving medications, and 69% of the exported pharmaceutical products from the United States. 75% of our nation's supply of bananas. So if you really like your bananas, you might need to start finding another place to get your potassium. 90% of imported cherries. Again, some people like them. I'm not a huge fan. 82% of hot peppers. 80% of chocolate. And many, many more. Imported beers, spirits, anything that comes from Europe, Asia, South America is likely impacted, and to a very high degree. So, to put a number to it, if the strike were to last 1 week, in agricultural products alone, because again, we're only going to look here at the agricultural, the perishable side of things beyond pharmaceuticals. That number would be around $320 million in agricultural products that would either spoil or have their supply chains disrupted. That's huge. A car, again, can sit on a container boat and be fine. Bananas, cherries, things that actually have an expiration date, and that expiration date is shorter than we might want it to be, those things are also impacted. 30% of the US's pork is imported. Those industries are going to be heavily hurt by this because that product is no longer delayed, it's now spoiled and lost. So this is the direct impact on supply things, but there's also some indirect effects as well. Because as I mentioned before, these container ships aren't just dropping stuff off and going home empty. There's this whole big network of cargo ships around the world that are constantly dropping something off, picking something up, dropping something off, picking something up. So if they're not able to drop off their stuff, pick up new stuff, and continue on their journey, that continuation is now affected. Their future deliveries are now affected. Because again, these cargo ships are not returning to their destination, and they're also not going to go back empty-handed. They are constantly filling their ships with full containers, bound for another destination. That is how global supply chains work. And funny enough, before all of this even started, I found a very interesting post on Reddit of all places. And it's a perfect example for today. So, dive with me into a story from Reddit. A user posted this picture. It is a can of pears that says that the pears were grown in Argentina, packaged in Thailand, and they purchased these pears on the east coast of the United States. Picture a map with me really quickly. Argentina, South America, west coast. It goes from Argentina, east coast actually. Sorry. Maybe I'm the one that needs a map here. It goes from Argentina in South America over to Thailand. Then in Thailand, they are taken apart, packaged into these syrup containers, and then put on another cargo ship and sent to the east coast of the United States. You know, it's really unfortunate when your packaged fruit gets to travel more than you do. But you know what? Let's continue on with our jet-lagged pears. And ask the more important question, why? It seems ridiculous that we are taking fruit from South America, sending it to the other side of the globe to be packaged, just to send it all the way back to the east coast of the United States. Well, obviously this was a post on Reddit, not some article that we have a real answer, but here's the very likely answer in both my opinion and the opinion of some other commenters. A boat arrived in Argentina. A container ship arrived in Argentina, and they were picking up a bunch of produce or a bunch of product to send over to Thailand. The boat is already going there. Think about it like you're driving somewhere and you've got 2 empty seats in the car. You've got yourself and 1 other passenger. The 2 back seats are open. If you want to save some money on gas, you can find 2 other people and say, you know what, throw me $5 for gas. I'm going there anyway. Just join in. So they're going to do that. The container ship is going to say, we will offer you cheap containers to Thailand. So the pears are incredibly cheap to transport to Thailand, where they can get cheaper labor. Labor costs are completely different in Argentina or the US versus Thailand. Same reason that many products that we see are made in Thailand, made in Vietnam, made in China. They have cheaper labor costs. And at times, what they save in labor is cheaper than what it costs to ship it there. So the pears get shipped over to Thailand, and then there's another ship that goes from Thailand to the United States that they get to stick their container on. It is hilarious, because again, it makes no literal sense that we are shipping something from South America to Asia back to the US. But welcome to global supply chains. And the reason that they are doing it is because that is probably the cheapest option. Never said it was going to make sense. I was just going to say that that's how it is. This opens up a very big conversation about a very big idea, supply chains. We're not going to go through supply chains because honestly, I had to sit through an entire course of it in college. I'm not going to do that to you. One, we don't have time for that. Two, I don't want to put you to sleep. It's not nap time. So instead, I'm going to summarize supply chains in one simple slide. It's a cycle of how stuff is created and how that stuff ends up in your hands. And between all of these different parts of the cycle, there are logistics that make everything work. Again, college business classes are going to go through a lot of details, but what we're going to focus on, and finally, there's the graphic, is looking at not the consumer, raw material, supplier, and all of that part. That's supply chain. That also is not relevant to today's topic. What we care about are all the little arrows that connect them. Logistics, 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 logistics. Logistics, or how goods, materials, anything is transported from one place to another, that's logistics, and that is what we are going to talk about. Because within logistics, there's this idea called the bullwhip effect, where one small change or issue can result in larger and larger and larger impacts down the line. Sometimes people will say a ripple effect. For little stuff, a ripple effect makes sense. You start off with really big changes and it gets smaller over time. Unfortunately, the bullwhip effect is the exact opposite. We start off with a small problem, and the longer that problem goes on, the bigger and bigger and bigger its impact, the further down the supply chain we go. This is a very common issue within supply chain, but is usually studied, as the picture shows above, from the customer side up. For example, back when people got really into crypto mining, and we all were stuck at home because of certain global issues at the time, people wanted to start buying some really nice computers. So they started buying GPUs, or graphics processors. Those GPUs, produced by a somewhat known company called NVIDIA, suddenly spiked in demand. But that doesn't just immediately get fixed, because the customers started to increase their demand, which means the retailers needed to ask for more supply. The warehouses have run out of supply, and now the supplier needs to try and meet all of this demand. The customers started it, and it ended up with the suppliers, and it took 18 months for the suppliers to finally catch up, then a little bit longer for the warehouses to catch up, and then finally the retailers to catch up. So that's how it can sometimes go, but it can also apply in reverse, where an issue within the supply itself causes issues with the warehouse, and bigger issues with the supplier, and then finally the biggest issues with the customer, us. So we're going to call this the supply side bullwhip effect. There will not be a test at the end of this webinar, I promise. But this is just the term for what we're talking about. And we're going to go through this through an example. But really quick, there was a question I want to answer. I can only imagine workers getting paid cents and working extreme hours to earn enough. That's a really good question. It's really tough because, again, I'm not going to comment on if I think the reason for the strike is justified or not. Both USMX and ILA agreed on at least a 50% increase in pay over the next 6 years. What they're disagreeing about is that ILA wants 77%, USMX only wants 50%. And what the ILA is saying is that through the global issues back in 2020 and the resulting impacts after that, these shipping companies tripled, quadrupled their profits. They're making so much more money and just pocketing it all. Very little of that money is ending up in the hands of the dock workers that are generating that income for them. So part of it is that there's a lot of difference between how much money these companies are making and the wages they're paying their employees, and in this case, the employees are all union workers. How does this affect exportation? And manufacturing, great question. We're going to get to that. Because we're going to talk about it kind of right now through an example and then apply it to the actual strike. So let's go through an example of a supply side bullwhip effect. We have a boat and it's got a bunch of bananas. It cannot unload its bananas. Because the strike is going on, no one is there to unload the containers. Now, the warehouse that was meant to receive those bananas is impacted. They're waiting for bananas, and unfortunately, they're not getting any bananas. But it's not just that one warehouse that's impacted. It's also the warehouse that was meant to take a bunch of containers and stick them on the now empty boat. So now, not only are the warehouses that want things not getting them, the warehouses that want to get rid of things aren't able to get rid of that either. So they're now sitting on containers that are potentially perishable containers that they can't get rid of. Now, the warehouse was meant to supply grocery stores. You know, the place that we usually buy our bananas from. If the warehouse doesn't have bananas, the grocery store isn't going to get bananas. So now, there could be entire regions of the United States that don't have bananas. One warehouse that has a bunch of bananas is not just supplying one grocery store, that'd be bananas. They're supplying dozens or hundreds of regional grocery stores. How often do you drive down the road and you see a Ralph's or a Walmart truck? There's a good chance that that truck has some bananas in it, has some apples, whatever product, cherries. So they're going to be transporting from the warehouse to many different grocery stores that product. So now, the grocery stores don't have bananas, and entire regions of grocery stores don't have bananas. So what are they going to do? Well, again, people would go bananas if they didn't have their bananas. So they're going to try and do something. If you noticed, I said before how 75% of the US's banana imports are from these ports. That means there's 25% of imports, but also domestically produced bananas as well. So there's bananas there, but the problem is those supply chains, the systems, the logistics to get the bananas from, say, California to New York, they're not there. They now need to start making room. They need to start spending time, but also spending money to get the bananas from where they actually are right now to where they need to go. But also, I don't know about you, I don't know about me, but I don't expect people to stop eating bananas because there's a banana shortage. If price was the same, people would still have the same demand for bananas, which means same demand means that prices are going to rise because there's a lot less bananas to go around. So, we now have much higher costs, and as a result, we have a big issue. We have less bananas, we're not getting more bananas, we're trying to get bananas from one place to another place they're not supposed to go to, and we're all paying way more for the said bananas. So that drives up prices significantly. We're going to go through an actual demonstration of just how much food can be impacted by rising or lowering costs once we get to my opinion. But for right now, we're going to leave things here for the direct impact, the direct supply impact of this strike. And we're going to revisit the indirect effects one more time. This is where we get into a little bit of my opinion before we actually get fully into my opinion. If the strike goes on for a short amount of time, about less than a week, we're going to be fine. Many of these grocery stores have a ton of bananas already in stock, have a ton of cherries, and a ton of product already there. These warehouses aren't empty. They're just not getting new stuff. So it's like saying if you want to make dinner, you go in your fridge and you start emptying things out of your fridge to make dinner. When we have an issue is when the fridge is empty and we need to go to the grocery store. Same thing with the grocery store itself. The grocery store will be fine until they need to go to the proverbial fridge, aka the warehouse, and get more stuff. Once the fridge is out of stuff, then we have problems. So that's going to take a little bit of time. So if it is a short strike and an agreement is reached, we're not going to see many problems. But the longer the strike goes on, the more and more issues we'll have, both within the East Coast and Gulf Coast ports, but also other domestic ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach, the first and third largest ports in the United States, as well as all of the other ports across the US, but also other neighboring countries as well. So that's part of the issue, is that it's going to start affecting more ports. But the longer it goes on, the more impact it will have, not only in terms of size, but length as well. The longer the strike happens, the longer and longer and larger the impact of this change will be. So it will take longer for supply chains to recover, which means it's going to significantly impact our economy. So let's dive into the economic and stock side of this event, starting with the direct impact. This one, honestly, is pretty easy. JP Morgan provided a risk assessment of this whole situation and said that the strike is going to cost the economy around $4 billion per day. Not great, also not terrible, and it's crazy to think that $4 billion is not that bad, but I'll show you why here in a little bit. The majority of that money, though, is recoverable, because not all of the produce, remember, we said $320 million about of agricultural product. The rest are going to be things that are longer shelf life or have no expiration and are just cars or manufactured goods. So once ports reopen, all the companies are still going to get their stuff. The only major impact is going to be the delays of that strike, but also the delays in getting those ships to their final or next destination. So, $4 billion a day, some of which, or honestly, most of it being recoverable. But today, the White House issued a statement stating that they're not going to intervene. In the past, some administrations have intervened and stopped workers from striking, requiring that they go back to work because of the impact that that strike will have. The current administration has decided to not force workers to go back and is honoring the workers' right to collectively strike for better working conditions, both monetarily and in job security. I'm not here to comment if you think that's right or wrong. That is your opinion, and that doesn't change the fact of the matter of where we go from here. So the direct impact, $4 billion, some of which is recoverable, but we don't know how long it's going to last. The indirect side is a lot harder to talk about because we have no idea. Right now, beyond the strike, we are in a very crucial turning point for our economy. Over the past 4 years, we have seen inflation skyrocket, almost to 10% for CPI inflation. And over the past 2 years, the federal banking system, or the U.S. banking system, the Federal Reserve, has done an incredible job at bringing inflation back into what we call acceptable levels. Many people are still going to say that the economy is in a rough spot or that costs are too high. The reality is, if we look at total numbers, inflation is back into what the Federal Reserve feels are acceptable levels. Things like food costs, those often are excluded. reasons we'll get to. But for the most part, the economy is in a better spot, especially a better spot than it was 2 years ago. And as a result, the Federal Reserve has begun to lower federal interest rates, meaning getting a mortgage is going to be cheaper, borrowing money is going to be cheaper, and it's a sign that our economy is beginning to grow steadily once again. That's a great thing. But because of this strike, there's a high chance that we see sharp inflation for many goods. Again, if demand doesn't go down, but supply has, the only thing to balance those out is cost. The cost is going to go up until demand goes down and we find an equilibrium. At what cost does supply once again meet demand? The lower the cost, or rather the lower the supply, the higher the cost will have to be to lower that demand. It's this horrible self-fulfilling prophecy. So, while we want to think that the Fed's job is over, that inflation is back under control, and it's going to stay there, if this strike goes on for weeks or months, it will send inflation back through the moon, or through the stratosphere, rather. So it does risk inflation skyrocketing because it's going to impact our imports, but also our exports across the board. So, let's talk my opinion. Starting with my opinion of inflation. How severe do I think the impact on inflation will be? I don't think it's going to be that bad. I don't think we're going to see much of an impact at all. Because of this. Typically, inflation is measured using two key numbers. We have core inflation, which is all inflation. Actually, I apologize. This is backwards. We have headline inflation, which is everything, and core inflation, which is everything minus food and energy. My apologies. The whole point of me explaining that is to say that there's a reason that we look at both headline, which is everything, and the reason it's called headline is that's what news publications love to talk about. But core inflation is also mentioned in the same sentence because food and energy are typically very, very volatile industries. These industries can spike in costs very quickly, but also decline very quickly. For example, with inflation, we saw, let's say, healthcare costs. They would go up by 5 to 6% annually, go down by 1 to 2% annually. Food costs, energy costs, those could go up 2 to 3 times, 200 to 300%, or go down 70 to 80%. So these areas are the most impacted when something happens. They react the fastest and have the largest change, but they also are the fastest to recover. Let me show you. Let's look at eggs. Welcome back to breakfast. What we see here is the price of a dozen eggs in the United States, dating back to the beginning of 2020, ending, right now we have data up to almost August of 2024. What we see is that in 2020, the price of eggs was around $1.40 for a dozen eggs. By January of 2022, we were up around $2. From January 2022 to January 2023, the price went from $2 for a dozen eggs to $4.80 for a dozen eggs. The price over doubled in just 1 year. Well, I would crack a few yolks right now, but I'm just going to get straight to the actual meat and potatoes of all this. After that, within 6 months, from January of 2023 all the way down to July of 2023, we saw the price drop from $4.80 all the way back down to around $2. Since July of 2023 to July of 2024, the price has gone back up to $3. The price of eggs can scramble anyone's brain, but this just goes to show that food costs are not something that is very stable. Food costs will vary wildly depending on the time of year, issues with supply, bad harvests, anything that can impact how much stuff we have available will impact the price. So, do I think that we're going to see crazy changes in inflation? No, because especially short term, the most impacted industries are also typically the most volatile, and they are the fastest to recover. So I do think short term, if this strike goes on for, let's say, 2 to 3 weeks, food costs will rise, and within 2 to 3 months, they'll be back down to normal, whatever that normal is. Now, my opinion of the supply chain side of things. It's a little hard to say, because I don't think it's going to be too bad. I think it's going to be pretty reasonable, because we're right before the holidays. I don't know about you, I went to Costco yesterday, and I couldn't find the Halloween stuff because all I saw was a giant blow-up Santa Claus. It's October 1st, people. Christmas is still 2 months away. I'm just glad, 3 months away, thank you. I'm just glad they're not playing Mariah Carey yet. The minute they start playing that in October, we're going to have some problems. So, a lot of places are already stocking up for the holidays, where current estimates put the number around 70% of what retailers will need to supply the holidays is already in their warehouses and in their inventories. So, they're usually taken care of. For things that are not perishable, they're probably fine. And the reality of it is, that increased supply is for the holidays. I would hope that people aren't going to Costco and buying a blow-up Santa Claus on October 1st. So that supply is probably going to sit there for a few months. The other side of it is that this strike did not come as a surprise. Suppliers, warehouses, retailers were not blindsided by this event. Keep in mind, everyone knew this deadline was coming up. Both the ILA and USMX knew that October 1st was the deadline, and the closer and closer we got to that, the more and more skeptical we actually were about them reaching an agreement. So, unlike just a freak event, this was something that many warehouses and retailers had time to prepare for. So while they can't fix the problem that now we're cut down in terms of how many bananas we have to 25%, they're not scrambling to come up with a backup plan. The backup plan is already made. Now they just need to put it into action at whatever increased cost that has. And we're not even talking about organic eggs, correct? So, my final opinion on supply chains, if the strike lasts a short amount of time, somewhere between 1 to 2 weeks, we're not going to see that much change. I think that most retailers will be able to handle it, and consumers will have to live with the fact that their car arrived 5 days late. If the strike lasts a few weeks or more, we're going to see some pretty sizable changes, mostly negative changes. Supply chains will be impacted, and these effects could go anywhere from about 6 to 8 months before we finally see a full recovery. Not great. And I don't have a slide on this, so I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. If you ask me for my opinion of how long I think this is going to go on, probably 1 to 3 weeks, depending, because the reality of it is, the ILA has no intentions of backing down on their demands. They are very fed up with how much money the USMX has been making, and they're fed up with having to negotiate for basic privileges of not getting replaced by automation and AI. I understand that. The USMX, they've been padding their wallets since 2020. They have record profits and record revenue, which means they have a lot of money they're sitting on. So they might just be able to afford the economic impact that this event is causing. So we have to figure out what is going to crack first. And that I don't know. But I would guess it's probably going to be somewhere in the range of 1 to 3 weeks max. So I don't see the long-term effects of this lasting anywhere beyond 2 to 3 months at the longest. This is a stock company, though. Let's quickly talk about my opinion of stocks. Again, I think it's going to depend on how long the strike goes on. The reality is, the market likes to freak out about anything that it can't predict. Nobody can predict how long the strike will go on. The market reacted negatively. Surprise. So the market dropped today by around 1.3% in the first 2 hours, but did recover some of those losses before it closed down around 0.6%, if I'm remembering correctly. As for where the market goes from here, I don't think we're going to see a crazy drop. I do think that the market is not going to stage a massive recovery. I think we'll see it continue to slide down very slightly as this continues to go on, and I don't expect some crazy rally or recovery until an agreement is reached. But that's on the short term. If the strike does go past 1 week and inches closer to 3 weeks or a month, I do think that we'll start to see companies really begin to struggle. I think because we have earnings results coming up in the next month, if 1 month from now, companies are talking about the impact to their supply chains and issuing negative EPS guidance because their Q4 revenue has been impacted, yeah, we're going to actually see stocks tumble. But short of that, I don't think anything is going to be too bad. I do also want to show really quickly how all of these events are impacting sector relative strength. One of the things that we study here at Sectors Made Simple is how different market sectors or types of companies compare to each other. And what I want to focus on right now is how today's momentum compares to yesterday's. What sectors are gaining and losing strength? And to do this, I need to disappear for a minute. So what we have here is the comparison of how today's relative strength looks compared to yesterday. Positive numbers indicate that the sector has gained strength. Negative numbers indicates that it has lost strength. So what we see are the communication sector, energy sector, and the healthcare sector are gaining some strength. That is probably just a sign that these industries are more resilient against this change, but to a greater extent, it's that they probably weren't punished as much. If we look at their actual returns, short of energy, that energy loves any time the market's not doing well, utilities, industrials, even healthcare, they didn't do great, but they didn't do poorly compared to other sectors like technology. Technology is one of the most sensitive sectors in the market, thriving when the market does well, struggling when the market underperforms. So, we were noting that technology primarily suffered as a result of today's changes. But again, only time will tell where that goes, and it's difficult to say how much of this was due to the issues with supply chains and with the strike versus other global events that are impacting areas of the world that are heavy producers of semiconductors and advanced processors. That is not a topic for today, and we're going to leave it at that. I'm back. Did you miss me? So, realistically, I don't see anything crazy happening with stocks, but I also don't see a recovery or a rally until this is solved. So, let's wrap things up by talking about what's happened in the past. Have we seen companies or have we seen major groups like the ILA go on strike before? Well, not to this scale, or at least not in the past 50 years. It has been almost 50 years. The last strike that the ILA did was in 1977. So since then, the ILA has not gone on strike. And it's really hard to compare the strike in 1977 to the strike of 2024, because our economies are completely different. It is no surprise that technology and our economy and how connected we are as a globe and as different nations has changed over the past 50 years. We rely on global supply chains so much more. We see cargo ships starting in South America, making their way to Asia, and ending up in Boston. That is not something that has been going on for decades. That is a slightly newer idea. So it's not fair to start looking at what happened in 1977 and attribute that to today. What we can do, though, is look at what happens when shipping gets interrupted. Because while we can't talk about how long the strike will take, we can take a look at the economic and recovery impacts of a shipping disruption. So let's see what we can learn. 3 years ago, on this channel, we talked about the Ever Given. It was a cargo ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal in Egypt. This Suez Canal is one of 2 major canals that are used for global transport, the next one being the Panama Canal. So, the Suez Canal is used by around 30% of global shipping, which makes it one of the most important touch points for our global logistics systems. And a big cargo ship got stuck in the middle. I'll have a picture up here in a moment. But that cargo ship getting stuck caused massive problems. Not because it got stuck at all, but because it took 6 days to get it unstuck. A big boat being stuck in one of the most important shipping routes in the world for 6 days is going to have an impact. Its impact was around $60 billion in direct losses and a global supply chain that took months to recover. When I was doing my preparation for this webinar, I found an article in which this article was written in November of 2021. So we're talking 8 months after the actual impact. And they were still discussing the current impact that disruption had on supply chains. So an event that happened in March and lasted only 6 days impacted global supply chains all the way up through November of 2021. Comparing that to where we are right now. There's not a boat stuck in the Suez Canal. This is something that companies have known about. Suppliers, logistics companies, everyone involved in the supply chain has known that this was a possibility. They didn't find out about it because all of a sudden they get a call from their boat captain that they can't finish their delivery. So we had advanced warning. The per day impact is smaller. And the reality of it is, the East Coast is not the Suez Canal. While the trade volume that goes through East Coast and Gulf Coast ports is very large, it's not Suez Canal large. So, do I think it's going to be $60 billion in losses? No. Do I think it's going to take months for them to recover? No. But unlike the boat, that was just a matter of how long it would take them to dislodge it, we're talking about negotiations between 2 major organizations. There's no working towards a solution until the solution actually happens. There's no saying we made some progress. It is we've reached a consensus. We are still negotiating. So we have no idea how long this is going to last or what the damages and recovery process will look like after the fact. So let's summarize. The ILA strike that is currently going on between the ILA and USMX does have the potential to cause disruptions for both domestic and international trade. Boats cannot unload their cargo in the US, and US product is not able to be loaded onto boats to be spread across the globe. It is very unlikely, in my opinion, but it is very possible that damaged supply chains will cause some inflation, especially in key industries like eggs, groceries, and consumer staples, perishable goods. I don't think it's going to get to some point where we are seeing large-scale, sweeping inflation across this nation. I think it's going to be isolated to key industries like food that are more accustomed, they're more used to those spikes and drops in inflation. So it's just going to be, we see the rising cost of eggs, and this too shall pass. But unfortunately, with no definitive timeline for how long negotiations will take, the longer the strike goes on, the larger the impact we'll see, and as a result, the longer the recovery will take, and finally, the higher chance we'll have for inflation rising once again. This event is very important, not because of the immediate impact that it has, but because of the bullwhip that it can create. Right now, it has the potential to be a ripple. We drop a rock into the water, there's an initial reaction, initial panic, and things calm down as time goes on. So, only time will tell if this is a ripple or a bullwhip, causing larger and larger impacts the longer it goes on and the further down the supply chain we get. But, again, we are talking about an event that started today. For all we know, tomorrow a decision could be reached, and this whole webinar seems a little silly. But, in the event that it doesn't, you now understand who is involved, what they want, and what the direct impact and indirect impacts will be for everything, from the supply side of things, all the way down to the economic, and finally, inflationary and policy changes and decisions as well. So in my opinion, go stock up on your Christmas gifts early this year. I'm kidding. Again, only time will tell. So keep an eye on our socials. We will be posting YouTube shorts here on YouTube, posting over on TikTok, and keeping you all updated as we receive news on this strike, and we'll report on when a decision or an agreement is made between the two parties. But until then, you can follow us here on our socials to stay up to date on all of our market news and economic insights we provide as we try and make the world of money just a little bit simpler for everyone. Thank you all so much. Take care.